at the Royal Poinciana Chapel in Palm Beach, Florida. I have the wonderful privilege for almost 20 years of having been the pastor there now. And every Sunday I step into the pulpit, I have this beautiful view through the back windows of the Breakers Golf Course right across the street from us. But I never thought there was a more beautiful view or a more scenic invitational one until I stood here and see the grand ocean ready and waiting for the sailboats to go by. It's a pleasure to be here once again, and I'm privileged and honored to be in your midst. At a church such as this, a pastor who was young and impassioned was invited to preach a summer sermon at an environment such as this. And he chose, perhaps unwisely, to talk about sin and judgment. And so he got into the pulpit in a very impassioned way. He said, each member of this church is going to die, and every member is going to face judgment, the judgment of God. And he did it twice, and he was interested because the man who was sitting in the front row here was smiling and kind of unfazed while everybody else was feeling a little bit remorseful at it. And he said it again. You know, every member of this congregation is going to die one day, and they're going to face the judgment of God. And everybody's kind of sitting back in their pew saying, wow, where's he going to go with this? And the man in the front pew is smiling, unfazed at all. And after the service, he went down after everybody was gone, and he said, you know, I'm a little curious because when I preached on the judgment of God and the sin of the people, and I said, every member of this church is going to die and one day face judgment, you just kept smiling and you were unfazed. What's going on? He said, well, I'm not a member of this church. Well, since I got a pretty good response, let me give you another one. Flying from Palm Beach to Newport, there was a man sitting next to a woman who was gilded in elegant outfitting. And on her ring finger was this beautiful, it looked like a 7-8 carat diamond. And admiringly, he turned to her and he said, wow, that's a beautiful diamond. I don't think I've ever seen one. Can you tell me a little bit about it? And she said, well, thank you very much for asking, but it's like the Hope diamond. It's called the Clockman diamond, and the Clockman diamond has a curse. And he said, well, tell me about the curse. And she said very simply, Mr. Clockman. That took a little bit more. Okay, anyway, that's enough for that. A windstorm arose on the sea so great that the boat was being swamped by the waves. So Matthew writes, and before him Mark. Once a foolish man built a boat. His intention was for it to be the grandest, the most talked about boat that ever sailed the harbor of the yacht club of which he was a member. He was determined in building that boat that he would spare absolutely no expense. That the boat builder would be known as a foolish man had nothing to do with his ability to build, nor anything to do with his capacity for hard work. Nor was it a reference to his personality. He was a most pleasant person. That he came to be called a foolish man had to do with the qualities of a person, the invisible qualities that no one is initially able to appreciate. As the foolish man built that boat, he outfitted his craft with colorful sails and complex rigging and comfortable appointments and cabin conveniences. The decks were made with imported teak wood, and all of the fittings were polished brass. And on the stern, painted in 18-karat gold letters, readable from a considerable distance away, was the name of the boat, which he called Persona. And as the foolish man, later to be known, was building Persona, he couldn't resist fantasizing. The admiration, the applause of the club at the launching of this grand new boat. In fact, the more he thought about the praise and the adulation, the more time and attention he gave to the boat's appearances. Now, because nobody could see the underside of the Persona, The man showed little concern about the boat's keel or anything that had to do with the properly distributed weight or ballast. Now, an experienced sailor, of which I'm sure there are a number of you here, might wince at this, but one must remember that the boat builder was acting on the perception of the crowd, not the seaworthiness of the vessel. Seaworthiness seems of little importance while the boat is in dry dock. And the man said to himself, why spend time, why spend money on what is out of everyone's sight? I hear them praising what they can see. The color of the sails, the brass fittings, the cabin, the conveniences, the decks, the wood texture, the capacity of the sail, and the potential for this boat's speed. That's what wins Saturday afternoon regattas. So driven by such reassurance and reasoning, the foolish man built his boat, and sure enough, when completed, everything that he envisioned for it was visible to the eye, and it just gleamed with excellence. The builder's suspicions were correct. The people of the club understood and appreciated sails and riggings and deck and brass and appointments, and what they saw they praised. Why, this is the grandest boat he thought he overheard in the history of this club. And perhaps he'd be elected the club's commodore. Well, the day came when the Persona was to be pushed out on its maiden voyage, and all of the engraved invitations had gold-plated pictures and words, the Persona at its launch. There was a brass band and plenty of hors d'oeuvres, and champagne flowed for lunch, and club members were gathered on the dock. The symbolic bottle of Dom Perignon was broken over the bow, and the moment came for the man to set out to sea. And as the breeze filled the sail and pushed the Persona out of the club's harbor, the man stood at the helm, proud as he could be, listening to the cheers of the crowd, the cheers' well wishes, and the envious admirers, saying, our club has never seen a grander boat than this. This man will make us the talk of the yachting world. There were even some boat owners who joined them, sailing on each side of the Persona together. They formed a spectacular flotilla as they moved beyond the breakwaters out into the ocean. And soon the Persona was just a mere blip on the horizon. And as it cut through the swells, its builder and its owner at that moment seemed anything but a foolish man. He gripped the wheel and he steered the rudder with fierce and just a feeling of deep pride. Oh, what he had accomplished. The man was seized by an increasing rush of confidence, and everything, his boat, his future, about his club membership and commodoreship, even the ocean was under his control. Or was it? But for a few miles out to sea, a storm arose, not a hurricane, but not a squall either, and there were sudden gusts and excess of 40 knots and waves of 15 feet, and the Persona began to shudder, and water swept over the sides. Bad things began to happen, and the poise of the captain began to waver, and perhaps the ocean wasn't his at all. And the other club members, he looked for them, right, left. Ones who sailed beside him, cheering and waving, none were to be seen. Because those boats, those captains, knew the storm clouds. They could read them when they saw them, and yet the foolish man was too self-absorbed to notice. And within minutes, the Persona's colorful sails, they were in shreds, and the mast was splintered into pieces, and the rigging was unceremoniously draped across the bow, and the teakwood decks and the lavish cabin stateroom, they were just awash with water. And then before he knew it, the foolish man could prepare himself. A wave that was bigger than anything he had ever seen hurled itself across the Persona, and the boat capsized. And this is important. When most boats would have righted themselves after such a battering, the Persona did not. Why? Because its builder, the very foolish builder, had ignored the importance of what was below the waterline. You see, there was no distributing weight there. And while a well-designed keel and adequate ballast distribution might have saved the ship, they were nowhere to be found. The foolish man had concerned himself with things above the waterline, the appearance of things, and not enough of the resilience and the stability of a boat in the secret, unhidden, or unseen places hid that really are needed when the storms come. Furthermore, because the foolish man had such confidence in his sailing abilities, he had never contemplated the possibility of a situation that he couldn't manage. And as a result, the mixture of poor planning and blind pride, the foolish man was lost at sea. The foolish man was never found. Today, when people speak of him, which is rare, they comment not about the initial success of the man or the beauty of the boat, but of the silliness of putting out a boat never designed to perform in a violent, tempestuous sea. And as time passed, the owner persona, whose name had been long forgotten, became known as the foolish man. Well, what does this story mean? There are other versions of the same story that are recycled in many different ways. Once a foolish man built a house on sand. Once a foolish man built a career on what he thought others thought of him. Once a foolish couple built a marriage. Once a foolish woman built a life. Once a foolish man built a submersible vessel, equipped and designed to sustain the ocean depths. If you happen to be a sailor, you may remember the name Michael Plant, Newport. Plant was a popular American yachtsman who began in the fall of 1992 a solo sailing venture across the North Atlantic Ocean from the United States, from New York City to France. His mid-sized sailboat, the Coyote, was state-of-the-art. Its design, its fabrication was the epitome of the modern sailing brand. And unlike the foolish man, the sailing community universally acknowledged Plant as a yachtsman whose seafaring skills were without equal. When friends and family gathered at the dock for an enthusiastic farewell, they were waving goodbye not to a foolish man, but to a nautical expert. One who had circumnavigated the globe 3 different times. And the prevailing thought always when you go out to sea is something could go wrong, but the thought that day was if anything went wrong, Michael could handle it. But less than 2 weeks into the voyage, you remember the story if you've been around and listening. Something did go wrong, and Plant and his sailboat were lost at sea. And 9 days into the voyage, there was a violent storm seen along the track of his route, and radio contact was lost. And for a while, that was thought just to be normal because of the distance. But the distress signal for those who were worried was more than presumptuous that everything was okay. And when the radio silence persisted on day 11, a search was dispatched, and airline pilots and crews and cargo ships were told to be on the lookout. Rescue aircraft in several nations started to comb the North Atlantic, and days passed, and it was reported that the boat was found floating upside down, and there was no sign of life. Again, sailboats don't capsize easily. Normally. They're built to take the pounding of the sea. Sailors allege that a sailboat is the most natural of sailing vessels, and it will almost always upright itself if pushed over, even if turned upside down. So what happened? The answer was soon clear. If you're a sailor, then you know that in order for a sailboat to maintain a steady course and in order for it to harness the tremendous power of the wind in the sea, there needs to be more weight below the water line than above it. Any violation of this principle is certain recipe for disaster. And when the coil was built, an 8,000-pound weight was bolted to the keel for that very reason. And further speculation led to the fact that it went missing and broke off. And when the 4-ton weight went missing, it lost and was compromised immediately with stability of the boat. And the first wave was probably the most disastrous weapon and probably the death blow. And no weight below the waterline was there to assure stability. And the result, a very capable, experienced sailor, admired for his ability, was lost at sea. The eccentric billionaire just recently built a submersible. The unexperienced engineer built an airplane. The extravagant man lived his life. The eccentric woman lived her life. The foolish man built a boat. The foolish, the wise. The point here is that the test of stability and survivability, friends, is not found in what's seen, the 8-carat diamond, adorned and admired, the Rolex watch, but it's what is unseen, often secret and below the surface. The weight below the waterline in our lives is what secures us when the storms of life hit. What determines the upright ability of our lives when the bottom goes up. The two stories, if nothing else, serve both as a warning and an invitation. Where to build in our lives the appropriate ballast, and why to give due attention to the investment and care to those spiritual and physical vessels designed to carry us through life, and when to do it. I wonder, and I can only ask and only you can answer, is where's the greatest weight placed in your lives for life's stability and eternal security? Is it above where everybody can see, or is it within and below the waterline of your life? The best day to answer that question perhaps is today. Well, the sun is shining and the surface is smooth. And the best one to answer that question in your life is you.